Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. I'm Henry Seltzer, and we want to talk about this new moon that's coming up, which is quite an interesting lunation. I know I've been saying that. The full moon on the 21st was also very strong, and actually a lot of things happened, as a matter of fact. So let's go ahead and bring up the chart. I think that's the first order of business here. So in this chart, what we're looking at is the natural houses from Aries all the way around to Pisces. And what we want to take a look at, besides just the position of the sun and moon at 12 degrees of Leo, and of course the first thing to mention really is the Leo nature of this new moon, which is full of the sun's energy. So, we do have that time of the year, that time of the sun, Leo season, which we're in the midst of now with 12 degrees already. So the fact of the matter is, this is a very strong energy anyway, and we want to see what it lights up in the chart. And there's quite a few things to look at. And of course, that we are looking at the chart of the new moon in the sense that it is a kind of a birth chart. It's a birth chart for the 30-day cycle when the moon will catch up to the sun again, and we'll have another new moon in the sign of Virgo, 30 days from now. So what we want to think about is all those factors, the signs and also the aspects made. And in particular, I'd like to call your attention to this Haumea-Pluto square. Now, this is not something that most astrologers are talking about yet, even though, of course, look, it's very close. It actually is a long-term aspect. One of the hallmarks of it is in 2023 on April 19th, which was the eclipse at the very tail end, 29 degrees 50 minutes of Aries, was therefore right around 0 degrees of Taurus, triggering, you see, from here, triggering this square. And that turned out to be a very significant point in time because that was the settlement of this Dominion lawsuit, which is quite interesting because Dominion voting machines, part of the claim of the election deniers was without evidence that there was fraud in the 2020 election. This is all ancient history, right? But as a result of that, though, there was something very concrete in the legal system, which was Fox News knowingly, because they kept saying in their internal emails, oh, this is ridiculous. Sidney Powell is just not credible. We don't believe the things she's saying about, this was done in Venezuela or something, But anyway, all of that aside, they promoted it because they thought that's what the political times required. They thought that was the way to support the Republican agenda, which, was a lot of people in the Republican leadership were stating that they were election deniers, and they had stated that there was fraud and that the election actually wasn't free and fair, but the other evidence was very much the contrary. So I'm getting a little political here, but the reason I'm bringing it up is because at this eclipse, which took place on April 19th, 2023, the Dominion lawsuit was settled by a $787 million payment from Fox News because they were shown to have defamed this company that did the voting machines. They said that they were not working right. And it did, of course, hurt the reputation of this company. So they did sue for defamation. It was considered, the evidence was open and shut, that there was defamation, knowing lying about this. And in fact, on the 18th, one day before that eclipse, on April 18th of 2023 was when that settlement took place. So that made me kind of pay attention a little bit, because Haumea is all about telling the truth. I see it all the time. People say, yes, I just have to tell the truth. That's who I am, and I can't help it. And sometimes it gets me in trouble, but I'm very frank and honest about what I personally feel is the truth. To have it with Pluto, I felt it did make some sense that we were bringing out the underside of that, which is not telling the truth, trying to get away with something, not being in integrity around these things. So that's what I see, and I did actually sometime back talking about this recent one, which was, this July 21st on Sunday, full moon, which remember that full moon was right at the tail end. The full moon was at 29 degrees of Capricorn with the sun opposite, and that did trigger this same configuration. I said, well, look out for something big to happen here. And it could be even something that puts the truth or lies about what's being said in the presidential election into focus, or into a new spin. There could be, I call it, lying on trial, kind of the proof of the truth of the matter, right? So anyway, what we did see was that was the very day that Biden resigned. Said he's not going to run, said he wanted to bring Kamala Harris in, please make her the candidate, and of course that's gone very well for the Democrats. So, and it's constant that she's saying, well, I was a prosecutor. I know how to deal with lies, So I just think it's so fascinating, these evidences, and then it does come up at the end of the year. It comes up on November 5th a little bit, which is the election. It comes up after November 5th in the late November. So this is just a little bit of a heads up from my standpoint, from my point of view, that we may be seeing the same kind of thing again at the end of the year that we've seen in the past with this election denial and the consequences of that, and coming into the legal system, perhaps. So with that long preamble, I'd like to talk about the energy that we have right here and now in this August 4th new moon, which is just coming up. And one thing that I'll have to bring up right away is that this Pluto Haumea square is also kind of partly triggered by Jupiter at 15 degrees of Gemini. The 15-degree Gemini mark is exactly 135 degrees from zero Scorpio, exactly 135 degrees from zero Aquarius. You could call it a sesquiyod to Jupiter. And Jupiter, as you know, is all about expansion, kind of joy, kind of taking the joyful aspect of things, and also expanding the effects of everything else, not necessarily to the good, but expanding. So I do see this new moon, August 4th, as a kind of another time when Haumea and Pluto are being triggered. And so once again, we don't know what's going to happen, but it looks like there may be more consequences for not telling the truth, and maybe more emphasis on the inner meaning and the full idea of integrity and, in fact, telling the truth. So these are things that are part of the zeitgeist right now, maybe part of our individual lives as well, that we are trying to deal with. It's like it's a struggle, isn't it? How do we stand for our integrity? How do we take what's inside us that tells us what's the right thing to do, and how do we do it? How do we come to doing that? I think it's such an interesting question, because a lot of times we know what's the right thing, and we don't always do it. That's just the way humans are, but they also have that chance to rise above. Now, this is a very active new moon. I want to bring forward some things about it. One thing is, astrologers have been talking about the fact that Mars and Jupiter here are only 6 degrees apart, less than 6 degrees apart, more like 5 and a bit. The thing is, that comes up later in the month, like around the 14th, 15th of the month. But what I see is in this new moon, it's right there. Why? Because if you take 6 degrees, divide it in half, making 3, and add it to the 9 or subtract it from the 15, you get 12. So this is 12 and a half, so is this midpoint. And let's check that actually. In the Time Passages software, we can actually look at the midpoints. So we can go to Reports, Midpoints, and see what it is for Mars, Jupiter. Mars, Jupiter, 1229. So isn't that interesting? 1229. The reason I find that so interesting is, look, this new moon is 1234. So it's almost an exact sextile in this case, right? Which is a positive thing. But this is already a very strong new moon, just having Mars and Jupiter beaming in a sextile supporting the new moon. You know that Mars is passion. Mars can also be internal anger or passion of any kind, sexual passion too. So this is kind of a sexy time and also a time when our passions could run away with us. So it is important to bear that in mind. That's the value of astrology, isn't it? That we can step back, take a more cosmic viewpoint, say, oh yeah, this is strong Mars. Maybe Mars hits your chart at 9 degrees of Gemini, or almost 10. Maybe 10 degrees of Gemini hits your chart. So, it's something to think about, that you want to, be careful not to speak too fast or too strong. If you can take a pause, say, can I get back to you on that? Or can you say, I have to leave now, but I'll be back, before you blurt something out that could be damaging. Our passions can be damaging when our words get harsh with each other. So that's something to think about too. And then one thing that I just noticed this morning looking over the chart, there's so many different aspects to this chart. What we want to mention also is we have Neptune at 29 degrees of Pisces, so almost on the Aries point, which is 0 degrees Aries. We're putting it in the Aries house here because it's so close to that Aries. It would be ascendant in this chart. But anytime you're close to the cusp, even if it's a whole sign cusp, what we have is a feature there. I'll just show you the option in the preferences on display options, that we can say we have a house margin that applies, and we can say apply to whole sign houses or not, depending on how we see it. So I do apply it to whole sign houses, and it does put Neptune to be more connected to whatever house is associated with Aries, because it's so close to the cusp, and the cusp is the sensitive point of the house. Anyway, that 29 degree, so that's the time passages, has that option. You can always turn it off. Some people like to see Neptune where it actually is, which, by the way, there's a little tick mark here, which shows you in the very ending part, the ending half degree of Pisces is where Neptune really is. But anyway, it applies to this house. So we have, another sextile. We have the fact that Neptune at almost 0 of Aries, therefore, is quite close to a sextile, very close sextile. And not only with Pluto, but the fact of the matter is there's another pair of inconjuncts, because 29 degrees of Leo. So 29 degrees, exact partile inconjunct or quincunx aspect from Neptune to, here we have Venus, the subject of a yod, from Neptune and Pluto. And in the time passages software, it spells it out in the aspect patterns. This is something no other software does, as far as I know. We have aspect pattern, yod to Venus, and then you can look and see how it makes sense. By the way, the funnel type would not count these new planets, right? And so the funnel would be from here to here, would be this leading planet of Saturn, which is the bowl, and then the focus point is Pluto. So that does bring Pluto into even more significance here. We have, the square to Haumea. We have now this part of this yod to Venus, which, interestingly, a yod to Venus from these intense outer planets does take the cosmic viewpoint on our relationships. Perhaps also our artistic creativity. There's a way that what we do in terms of aesthetics does also come under Venus, as well as understanding that it is interpersonal connection, that's so important with Venus. That partakes right now, because of this new moon, and for the next 30 days, therefore, of this strong Pluto-Neptune combination, which is a very transformational combination. When they come together in the world transit, that is to say the conjunction of Pluto and Neptune, that is really close to 1900. It's a 500-year cycle. It's very close also to 1400. And the world changed after 1400, got more scientific, got sort of abandoned some of the age of faith that preceded that. And now in 1900, of course, now we have the modern era, which we're in the midst of figuring out what that is. And to me, it's very important to recognize that we have to find new models of spirit in this 21st century, modern era, in this postmodern era, to take us further, to take us beyond, because to me, the older fundamentalist religions don't have as much currency anymore. I know there's a backlash on that, people trying to reestablish them, seeing them fading. But to me, new models of spirit could involve also recognizing that astrology works, unbelievably works. There's no way to say how it works. To me, it's symbolic. They're just in their orbits, these planets, and yet they tell us, as you know, very clearly, tell us things about ourselves when we look at our natal chart, or about world events when we look at the mundane astrology of what's going on. So that's a mystery. It doesn't make sense, and I think we have to acknowledge that there's a mystical component, that life consists of both rational and non-rational elements that are equally important, as the sun and moon are equally important. And so we do have to think, in terms of symbolism, and so we do have to think that maybe there's a way forward, but it does involve a change in attitude, a change in consciousness, a change in the way we understand things as a culture. And we see a little bit of that creeping into our relationships at this time. So taking a more cosmic perspective might mean that you can get past certain issues. You can recognize that it's part of a pattern of evolution. It could mean, Pluto stands for transformation and change. It could mean changes are required. There's a way that you're doing your interpersonal relationships that need to change, and that may need to be more idealistic, maybe more acknowledging the mystical side of life. That's Neptune. Maybe just it's time for a change. It could be a change in the way you do it, the way the two of you do it, recognizing that. And it could be, who knows, a change that is necessary change when it does happen at times, that things have to shift. One relationship dies, another one is born, perhaps. So all of that. With also Uranus, by the way, Uranus is about 27 degrees of Taurus, so making a pretty strong square, which is fading now. It was really active. I think the second was the perfect exact moment, but and this is the fourth, this new moon, but still, that is a factor too, the suddenness. So all three of the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, are aspecting in very strong ways Venus right now in this new moon. So I do think that's something to keep in mind also as we go. Now, another thing with all this that we can think about with all our personal situations is that we do have a pretty strong conjunction between Chiron at 23. So it's really about 2 degrees. Chiron and Eris are conjunct. They have been for a long time. Now they're retrograde together. They were going forward together. They're really close together. So what does that tell us? But we really have a kind of a life path. Eris represents soul intention. It represents being a warrior for soul intention. It represents doing something about it, taking a stand. And what we have to do really is take a stand for what only we have. In other words, you don't get this from early conditioning, which we have to get beyond usually. We don't get this from consensus reality, which we also have to get past. There's ways that what's going on in the world that people are saying, everybody's thinking, what the media has, what the social media conveys, can be influencing us, and there's ways that they can be influencing us if it doesn't match what we have inside ourselves. That's an issue, and that is the issue of Eris. And so the issue is we have to be brave. We have to sometimes go against that tide, and we have to stand up for ourselves what it is that we deeply believe in. It shows over and over again many ways that that's been demonstrated in that. The book I wrote, The 10th Planet, has been pretty well accepted now as a feminine warrior, a warrior for deep intention, not a warrior just for any old thing, but a warrior for what you really deeply believe, and finding what you most deeply believe. That's you could say, the trick. It's certainly what gives meaning to life is when we do find what we can bring, what it is that we're supposed to be doing here. So the fact that Chiron is involved does mean that there's a way of recognizing another one of these strong outer planets, shamanic planets, planets that go to depth within the psyche, just as Pluto does, just as Eris does, and tells us that we have to acknowledge that. In other words, there may be, and that gets to the early conditioning again, there may have been misapplied parental authority, for example, other ways that we were wounded in our early childhood that we buried it away. That's what Chiron tells us, where those things come out. So there's a real issue now, too, in this new moon timing and in the 30 days that follow, to be thinking about that, to be more aware of that, to be fighting for some kind of acceptance of ourselves in that way, so that we can get beyond, if we pay no attention to these inner wounds, they can take us over like monsters. We can all of a sudden become enraged, and where's that coming from? It's our inner anger. Where's that coming from? Many times it's early experiences, early wounding that we've buried away, that you can bury it away beyond the walls of, you don't want to go there, but when you were a kid, you really didn't want to go there, and you just sometimes didn't even remember it, it's like buried from the memory. Paying attention to it is important. That's what lets it free. Ram Dass says that these monsters that come and take us over never really go away. They're always part of our basic personality, our under the covers, in the depths of us, personality. But that they can become, he says, these little schmoos that you can invite them in for tea. So there is a way that we can deal with those things and deal with them better and acknowledge it as the first step. So maybe just the courage to acknowledge what's within us that may be difficult and damaging and hurt, coming from earlier painful situation, a wounded place within us. So just acknowledging that, sometimes people don't want to admit that there's nothing wrong with me, I'm not flawed. But as another quote, as Leonard Cohen says in his famous line, crack in everything. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. And that's how the light gets in. So there's a little bit of what's going on with having a powerful position of Chiron as well as Eris. And what I've discovered when I was checking things out was there is a very close septile aspect between, you can see in the aspect list, let's see, display aspects, aspect grid. And if we look at Chiron, which is here, and we look at Jupiter, which is here, there's the septile of 1/10 of a degree between Jupiter and Chiron. So that's why I've been talking so much about it, knowing that, because that does bring it to more prominence, that brings it to our attention, that brings it to our celebration. There's a way we can celebrate the inner knowing that comes from understanding a bit more about those wounds within us. So, Mars is really lit up too. Mars is not only closing in, well, it's 6 degrees, so that's not very close, but there's a parallel between Mars and Jupiter. And what I wanted to say also is instead of the 14th when they actually come together, we could be thinking about this right now already, since it's in the full moon, new moon. It's in the new moon, 12 degrees and a half is the midpoint. And then also if we check out the declinations, which you can right click, so the declinations tell us that Mars is parallel to the moon in this new moon, also parallel to Jupiter. So we'd want, and also parallel to Maki, which is one of these new ones, which I talk about as well sometimes, right? So we were talking about the one nature planet, Haumea, but the other one is Maki at 9 degrees, and you can see that there is a very close Mars and Maki trine, and as well if we look at the declinations, let's see. Well, I wanted to show you the declinations, so Mars is at 21.4, Jupiter 21.9, so that's a half a degree off. And then also Maki is 21.3. The moon is 21.1. So there's really quite a lot of parallels that we have to pay attention to as well in this configuration. So let's see what else that I want to mention. I think we should wind up. It's just a very powerful new moon with all these factors in it. And of course, the other thing is Mercury's retrograde the same day. So Mercury at 4 degrees is where it retrogrades. I can right-click on Mercury for that. And the next retrograde is 4 degrees and 6 minutes, and we're already at 4 degrees 5 minutes. So basically it doesn't change throughout the day here. It's still at 4 degrees 5, 4 degrees 6. And let's see. Okay. So these are the things that we already know about the Mercury retrograde coming up. It's a time of, we'll go backwards into Leo. So it's a time of really thinking twice about whatever the Leo house is in your chart. It starts in Virgo, so the one that's beyond that, the next one is the first hit. So if that turns out to be your relationship sector, if you're a Pisces, for example, it is true. And by the way, Saturn is another thing that's in this new moon. You can see there's an aspect. If I put the mouse on it, I can see that it's a biquintile aspect of 0.2 of a degree to Saturn. So Saturn, another of these important planets, will eventually be also Jupiter when it gets a couple more degrees. So in the full moon, Jupiter is exactly square to Saturn, and that's coming up. So that's another thing to mention, that Jupiter-Saturn is part of the 20-year cycle of Jupiter conjunct Saturn, which was at the solstice of a few years back. I think it was 2021. Anyway, we're seeing that working itself out. So that whole 20-year cycle is more of a political cycle, but we can see that happening in the zeitgeist, that there's a turning point now in the zeitgeist, that we would look back to those times and then see how that's evolved since then. And that's all part of this new moon as well, since we have the strong Jupiter and we have the strong Saturn, and eventually at the 2 weeks later at the full moon, we're having kind of the exact at 17 degrees, Saturn moving back a degree, Jupiter moving forward 2 degrees. We will have that exact at the full moon. So that's another thing to think of. It's just a very important and in some ways difficult time, but it's a time that we have to deal with and to recognize again by taking the cosmic perspective, by recognizing that everything is working itself out in a certain way. Don't you see, Ram Dass's guru told him when he was worried about Bangladesh's floods, don't you see, Ram Dass, he said, it's all perfect. So, that's really the cosmic perspective, but maybe we can get there to some extent. So let me switch back to this other view and just wind up here. And just say, so what do? We have tough times. These are very, very intense times. The world situation, our personal situation perhaps, economic situation perhaps. Things that we're dealing with, and we can get despairing. And there's that saying, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And it's a cliche. Another one is, be sure you're right, then go ahead. In other words, using what you have inside, all you can do is go by your lights inside. Don't be swayed, don't be enslaved to another's opinion or the consensus opinion, but find out what your opinion is, find out where you stand, find out what you most deeply believe, and act upon that. And then, in a way, you're free. You can't do any better than that. So you can just be, and all you can do is be the most authentic version of yourself that you can muster, and that's enough. So good luck with all that. Best of luck, and see you soon. Take care.